Hello everyone, my name is Lovey and I am the girl without gluten. Today we are going to be making chicken pot pie and I'm very excited because I have a new Le Creuset pot, I guess, from my sister that she got me for Christmas, and it's the perfect little size to make chicken pot pie in, so that's what I'm going to do. I did also receive a 10-pound bag of potatoes from my mom that I brought home when we came home after Christmas. And I have already peeled and washed those. So those are waiting to be diced up to be put in our chicken pot pie. And now we need to first we need to peel and dice our carrots, and then celery, and then onion. And then we can start assembling our chicken pot pie. We'll worry about the crust later, which feels strange because normally you would want to make the crust right away so that it could go in the fridge, but this is a slightly different crust. Anyways, we are going to start by peeling our carrots, and I have 2 bags of carrots left in my fridge, so I'm just gonna go ahead and peel and wash all of the carrots that I have, and then we'll go from there. I don't know if I'm gonna use all of them from chicken pot pie, but I'm kind of sick of them being in this state in my fridge. So similar to how I did with the potatoes earlier, I'm just gonna peel the carrots right onto this paper bag, and then that way at the end I can just like roll the paper bag up and not have to wash my cutting board as much. And then I'm just gonna put the carrots in this colander here because I'm gonna like rinse them off after this. I also do have chicken broth behind me in this Le Creuset right here. A while ago, like I think definitely before Thanksgiving, I had gotten 2 of those whole chickens from Costco and have roasted them up at different times. One of them, the chicken itself turned out really good in the sense that it was cooked nicely. Like it wasn't dried out or anything. It was cooked evenly throughout the whole chicken. But flavor wise, I put a lot of like herbs into the compound butter, and then I didn't really like the way that looked. And then I also put lemons in it, and Gus did not like the lemons. And then the second one, I liked the flavor that I did. Like I just did like salt, pepper, garlic, onion. I think that was it. Oh, and then I did put a little bit of thyme, but I put it in like a tea bag, and then pulled it out so that way there weren't like thyme leaves dispersed throughout the whole chicken. And I liked that flavor, but then when I baked the chicken, I hadn't like fully thawed out all the way to the center of the chicken. And so it took a really long time for it to hit temperature, and then it was dried out, of course. So I have those 2 chicken carcasses. I'm gonna rinse this off. But I have 2 chicken carcasses and then the various like vegetables that were in the birds and stuff. And then that's gonna be broth that we'll use for our chicken pot pie. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go rinse these off, and then I'm pretty sure I'm done with my vegetable peeler, so I think I can leave that in the sink. I don't want to get rid of this bag because I still need to cut off like the tops of my carrots and stuff. But I do want to use my cutting board, so I'm going to slide this over now. And I went and got a bowl, so that way I think I'm probably going to end up using all these carrots for the chicken pot pie. So I think I'm just going to put them in a bowl instead of like a Ziploc or something. So yeah, chicken pot pie is something that I like love. I think it's my Midwestern family vibes showing, but I really enjoy chicken pot pie. Gus hates it. I mean, he probably would like it if he tried it, but it's just like not something that he really wants, and I think that's fine. But yeah, he doesn't like chicken pot pie, and I don't really want to go through a bunch of effort of making something that he's like, yeah, it was fine. Like, sure, I could have had frozen pizza and I would have been just as happy. So while Gus is gone, because he's on a business trip right now, I am going to take advantage of that and make a big batch of chicken pot pie, which now that I've said it so many times in a row is really starting to feel weird. But I'm going to make a big batch and then I'm going to freeze it in my super cubes. And so that way, when it's either like lunchtime or just like a random night when I'm either not making dinner or we're having leftovers or Gus really wants something that has gluten in it, I can pull out some chicken pot pie and I can make it, and it's really easy. And then we only have to worry about making dinner for him. So like a lot of times I'll do that where I have something that's frozen, pre-made, and I'll put it in the toaster oven, but it's frozen. It's going to take like 45 minutes to an hour to get hot. And then during that 45 minutes, that's when I'll make Gus's dinner. And then we'll sit down and we'll eat dinner together. And we'll have both of our food and it's ready at the same time. And I get to have something that I really, really like. And it didn't require any dishes or hands-on prep time. And Gus also got to have something that he really, really likes. But I only had to make one dinner. And we got to eat together, because a lot of times I don't mind making two dinners, and I don't even mind making two dinners back to back, but it's kind of a bummer when we don't see each other all day and then we also don't get to eat together. So this is what we've been doing and it's working out. That way we get to hang out, but we also have tasty food. And then I just try to, you know, plan meals that I know Gus doesn't really like. I plan those for when he's on work trips. And then that way he doesn't have to eat them. I don't cut stuff sitting down very often. It feels kind of strange. I like don't know what to do with this elbow. Chef snack. All right, so this is how many carrots we got. I'm definitely going to use all of this for the chicken pot pie, except for my little chef snack, which I'm going to munch on while I keep making this, because I might have ADHD hyper-focused on this and forgot to feed myself throughout the day, and it's 6:32. So anyways, I'm going to snack on some carrot sticks while the rest of this process happens. And we are going to go ahead and move on to celery now. Okay, the celery got really bitter for a second there. The celery was the only vegetable that I did wash yesterday. It was not looking super great when I got it from the Walmart delivery guy. So I, you know, cut off the gross bits and washed it and then kind of like spruced it up by, you know, rinsing it under cold water and then putting it in the fridge. So this doesn't need to be washed, so it's going to go directly into the bowl. Now we have our little assembly line going. So I'm just gonna go until I get enough celery that is like around the same amount of carrots I have. And we're just going to use that as like a guide. I think we're gonna call that good for celery. I'm gonna do one more stick. We are going to move on to dicing potatoes now. I realized I didn't want to use a cereal bowl. I want something a little bit bigger because I want the potatoes to be submerged in water. And then for the potatoes, we want them to be like roughly the same size as the carrots, I would say. Dog is staring at me. I can't tell if he wants something or not. Okay, so that's a little bit less than the amount of carrots and celery that we have. So I think that's going to be good. So the rest of the onions, I'm going to continue to just dice them up, but then I'm going to put them into this freezer Ziploc, and then I'll stick them in the freezer. One fun thing about onions, if you have contacts, they do not affect you nearly as much as if you were not wearing your contacts, or, you know, if you just didn't have them. So if you know, wear glasses and contacts and you're debating chopping an onion, go put your contacts in. It's definitely worth it, at least in my opinion. Hey, Mac, you don't need to bark, bud. It's fine. I am becoming overstimulated. Okay, I might only chop up 2 of the 3 onions because my eyes are going to start watering, I think. All right, cool. I'm gonna go put this somewhere else and then come back and deal with this, and then we'll move on to the next thing. So here I am just turning the pan on to medium-low heat, maybe just low heat, and I have just added a few tablespoons of butter and a few tablespoons of bacon fat, and I am just letting that melt. And then here I am checking on my chicken broth. You can see most of the meat has fallen off of the bones, and the bones are looking pretty pathetic, so it's almost done. It's been a few minutes, so my fat has melted, and I'm gonna go ahead and add my onions to the mix and get them sauteing. I like to always start with my onions first and let them go for a few minutes to kind of get started caramelizing before I add in the rest of my vegetables. This is my little heart spoon that I got from, it was either my mom or my sister for Christmas, but I really like it and it's cute. I'm just adding a little bit of salt to help the onions break down. And there you can see my Le Creuset spoon rest matches my heart spatula, and I'm quite happy with that. Alright, so we're moving on to celery. Nothing fancy here, we're just adding in the celery and coating it in the oil and letting it saute. And then same thing with the carrots. Just adding a bit more salt because the carrots and celery don't have any salt on them. And adding in some black pepper. Next I'm going in with some white ground pepper. Lately I've been adding white pepper to a lot of stuff, and I find that it really adds like a nice depth of flavor without it being overtly black pepper, because it's not black pepper. I'm still just waiting for my vegetables to saute more. I think they're probably like halfway there at this point, so we still have a ways to go. So here I am starting to get ready to work on my crust. We're going to start by grating some butter, and we want the butter to stay really cold. So I like to grate it directly onto a quarter sheet pan, and then I can put that tray of shredded butter directly into the freezer, and it can wait until I'm ready to actually make the rest of the crust. So here I am, you can see the vegetables are starting to saute a lot more, and at this point I'm really starting to scrape the bottom of the pan. Any fond that is developing on the bottom of the pan, I want it to stick to the vegetables and not the pan itself, so that way it doesn't burn to the bottom. And then I went and just grabbed some minced garlic from my freezer, and it's just ready. Because it's frozen, it was in the freezer, I just grabbed it out and I'm letting it kind of come to room temperature while my vegetables finish sauteing. This is the butter that I like to use. It's just the grass-fed butter from Costco. I think it's a good price and it's really good quality. I really like it. And right here, this is when the project really starts to go downhill. You can't really tell, but I did just grate part of my thumb when I was trying to grate the butter. So I really quickly ran off, bandaged up my thumb, cleaned up the butter that was contaminated, ran back, and my vegetables were pretty much done at this point. So I could smell that they were starting to not quite burn, but they were getting close to it. So when I ran back into the kitchen, I really quickly stirred those, make sure they weren't burning, and then I go ahead and get started on my second batch of butter. So this is take 2. Here I am with fresh butter and band-aids and gloves on, and going to head grate my butter again. You should make sure that you have space in your freezer for the little sheet pan before you start grating it, just that way you can stick it in the freezer right away. And that's what it looks like when the butter is all grated. So when I was deciding what order to make my components in, I forgot that the crust is supposed to rise for an hour after it chills in the fridge. So I really should have made my crust first, and then while it was rising, I should have made my filling, but I didn't. It was a bit of an oof. So now I'm going to start making the roux on the chicken pot pie filling. So I just added a few tablespoons of butter, and then now I'm going to go in with my favorite gluten-free flour. I can add a link to this. I get it on Amazon. I found Subscribe and Save is the cheapest way to get it. And I'm going to go in with a full half cup of flour. This is a pretty generous amount of chicken pot pie filling, and I want to make sure that it sets up right. So here I am adding in my potatoes. Those don't need a saute, but I still want them to be included in the roux. So right after I go ahead and add in the potatoes, you're going to see me add in the flour here in a second, but I'm making sure everything is getting coated in the melted butter first. And then after we add the flour to the filling mixture, we're going to need to add the chicken broth pretty much right away, well, within a few minutes. So here I have my glass measuring cup with a strainer over the top, and I'm just going to measure out maybe 4 cups of chicken broth and get it strained so that way I can put it into my filling. So there's my chicken broth. This is the milk I like to get from Costco. And when you make chicken pot pie, when you are making your roux, well, after you make your roux and you're adding in your liquid, you typically do a mixture of chicken broth and milk. So there I am debating if I want to use the whole cup of flour, and I decided to go for it, which was definitely the right call. And at this point, you want to let the roux cook for a good 3 to 5 minutes. I know with gluten, like all-purpose normal flour, they often say like 60 seconds to 2 minutes for letting your roux cook just to get the raw flour taste out. I have found with gluten-free flour, you need an extra minute or two. So that's why I actually go set my timer for like 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, I think. And I really let that cook and make sure that I really get rid of that raw flour flavor. So that's what it looks like before you add the liquid. It gets kind of like this shaggy coating on everything, and then you start adding in your liquid. Do a little bit at a time and mix in between, and you'll see the roux start to form. It will get really thick, and it will look kind of weird. And then as you add more liquid, it starts to become more sauce-like. And this is where it starts to become more about consistency and texture rather than actual measurements. So I started with about 2 full cups of broth. I added probably about 1.5 cups of milk there. And that's kind of like my starting point. Once I see how thick the filling is, I will add a little bit more chicken broth or milk or whatever it is to get it to the consistency that I want. And that's where you have some flexibility. But yeah, you don't want it to be super runny, but you also don't want it to be dry. And make sure you stir it thoroughly in between adding the liquid. Like make sure that the liquid is fully incorporated before you start to add more. So there I am on my 3rd-ish cup of chicken broth. And I am cutting out quite a bit of stirring in between each of these additions of liquid. You really want to make sure that you fully incorporate the liquid before you start adding more. So you might have noticed that I haven't added any peas to this mixture. A lot of people do add peas to their chicken pot pie. I do like to do that. However, I really don't like mushy peas, so I wait until the very end. Here I am adding my chicken. At this point in the night, I was tired and didn't want to make chicken, so I just used canned chicken because I could just grab it off my pantry shelf and throw it in right away. And also it stays really moist. So since this is something that gets cooked on the stove and then it goes into the oven to bake, I do find that using the canned chicken works out really well because it is so moist. It doesn't dry out after you cook it for the third time, I guess. And then here I am, and it's very important to taste your food. So I'm just putting it back into the can so I don't make another dirty dish. And then I'm going to use a clean spoon to taste it and check my seasonings. And I do end up going back in with a hefty pinch of salt and some more black ground pepper and white ground pepper as well. Potatoes take a lot of salt. And also I hadn't salted my chicken broth at this point because I was using a chicken carcass that already had a bunch of seasoning in it. I didn't add any seasoning to that because I wanted to make sure that I was controlling the amount of sodium in my overall dish. And this way I could wait until the end and then adjust from there. So here I am adjusting my spices, stirring everything in, trying not to make a mess. And then I go ahead and taste it again just to make sure that everything was good. And there I decided it's good. So now I'm moving on to the crust. These are the dry ingredients. So it's flour, sugar, salt, and yeast. Then we have our shredded butter. Now we are going to combine those and coat the butter pieces with the flour mixture. And now we go ahead and take our wet ingredients, which is water, milk, and egg, I believe, and combine that in with our dry ingredients, and we get this kind of shaggy dough. You don't want to overwork the dough. And at this point, I just go ahead and put it into some parchment paper, roll it out, and stick it in the fridge. Now, you might have noticed there was about a 2-hour time jump there because at this point in the night, I really just had to take a break, eat some food. I hadn't eaten anything that day except for a couple carrot slices. And also my phone battery was dying. My phone was running out of storage. My little light that I used, the battery had died. So I took a break and then we came back. And now we're going to start working on folding the pastry. So this is what creates the layers. So you start in a rectangle, you fold that rectangle into thirds, which is what I'm doing right here. And then once you have that like folded up chunk of pastry, you roll it out again into a big rectangle, fold it into thirds, and then stick it in the fridge. By the way, this is a copycat crescent roll recipe, like Pillsbury crescent rolls. Obviously, since I have celiac, I can't use the normal crescent rolls. So I found this recipe maybe like a year ago and I'm obsessed with it. I make it all the time. It's really good. And I'm just using my bench scraper to help me get any extra bits of dough that are sticking to the parchment paper. Just because, you know, we don't want to be wasters. Now, I did rip my parchment paper with the bench scraper. So I'm getting a new piece of parchment paper. And I intentionally got a very large piece of parchment paper so I can fold it over and use that to roll out my pastry after it chills. So I'm kind of struggling, not having enough counter space here. And I'm going to take my little third, roll it up, get ready to roll it out. I'm going to scrape off my excess from my parchment paper again. And then I'm going to go ahead and roll this out into a big rectangle again. So once I rolled it out into the long skinny rectangle, I folded it into thirds again and stuck it in the fridge. And then waited, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. And now I'm going to come and roll it out and fold it up again. So you repeat this process a couple times. And again, that's what creates the lamination. and gives you good flakes. And then you let it chill, and then you roll it out into whatever form you're actually going to consume it in, and then you let it rise, and then you bake it. Now, because it is so late in the day, and I was getting so tired by this project, at this point I had realized I had made a mistake, and my dough wasn't going to have enough time to rise, and I just kind of roll with it. It still turns out delicious. It's still nice and puffy and fluffy. It's just not quite as fluffy as it could have been. So here what I'm doing is, so after you fold it into thirds, you end up with a smaller rectangle, but it's not oriented the direction that you need it to be. You need it to be 90 degrees. So that way you can utilize your parchment paper the best. So in this clip, I'm just using that scrap piece of parchment paper to kind of flip it around to make sure that my block of dough is down at the bottom of the parchment paper, so I can fold it over and it's rotated in the direction where when I roll it out, it's not going to go out the edges of the parchment paper. You can see at this point I added in a sill pat underneath the parchment paper. That just helps keep the dough from sliding around as I'm rolling it out. It makes it way easier. So here I am working to get the large rectangle shape. You can tell I'm starting to get tired. In this clip, you can see the bottom edge of the parchment paper is starting to get really wavy. That happens as you roll out the pastry and, you know, it spreads on the parchment paper. It kind of buckles. You want to make sure that you are peeling the parchment paper back and releasing it from the pastry dough every so often. That way it doesn't stick to the parchment paper horribly. Another tip is to actually use the fold in the parchment paper to help create a straight edge. You can kind of see it in this clip. When I rolled it out, I pushed the dough up into the fold, and that way it just ends up with a very clean edge, and it helps when you're folding it a little bit, I think, to keep stuff tidy. So I am going into what I believe ends up being my last lamination of this. You can tell I'm tired and it's taking me longer to think stuff through because I keep hesitating. And once again, I'm just moving the pastry block to be at one end of the parchment paper so it's easier to roll it out after it's chilled. So I am going to break this video into two parts. I ended up with quite a bit of footage, and it was just going to end up being really, really long if I left it all in one video. So this is where I'm going to leave off for the first video. We have our crust prepped, we have our filling prepped, and in the next clip we will assemble.